Right now, you are still waiting. Waiting for a message. Waiting for someone to come back. Waiting for your life to feel normal again. But listen carefully. Nobody is coming. And the longer you hold on to that hope, the deeper your suffering becomes. 1. The architecture of waiting, why we outsource our liberation. Before we can understand why nobody is coming to save you, we must first understand why we so desperately want them to. We must look clearly and without judgment at the structure of waiting itself, at how it is built, why it persists, and what it is actually protecting us from. The Buddha's first noble truth is dukkha. This word is often translated as suffering, but that translation is incomplete. Dukkha is better understood as a kind of fundamental unsatisfactoriness, a pervasive sense that something is not quite right, that something is missing, that even the pleasurable moments carry within them a subtle undercurrent of unease. The ancient image for dukkha is a wheel whose axle does not sit perfectly centered in its hub. The wheel turns, and it moves forward, but there is always a slight wobble, a slight grinding, a resistance that never fully goes away. We are born into this wobble. We do not choose it. It precedes our first thought, our first memory, our first word. And because we arrive in the world already wobbling, already aching, already incomplete in ways we cannot even name yet, the natural response of the infant mind and the adult mind that is in many ways still an infant is to look outward, to cry, to reach, to want. This is not wrong. This reaching is how we survive. The infant who does not cry does not get fed. The child who does not reach does not get held. The evolutionary wiring that drives us toward others for comfort, for sustenance, for protection is ancient and powerful, and has served our species extraordinarily well. We are social creatures in the most profound sense. We genuinely need each other, and the Buddha never denied this. Sangha, community, is one of the 3 jewels of Buddhism. Connection matters. Relationship matters. But here is where the teaching sharpens into something uncomfortable. There is a difference between genuine human connection and the desperate outsourcing of your own awakening. There is a difference between receiving love from another person and demanding that their love be the thing that makes you whole. There is a difference between leaning on a teacher and expecting the teacher to carry you all the way to liberation. That last step, the Buddha said again and again, must always be walked alone. The Dhammapada opens with 2 of the most important verses in all of Buddhist literature. Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. And then, if one speaks or acts with a corrupt mind, suffering follows, as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox. And then the reversal. If one speaks or acts with a serene mind, happiness follows, like a shadow that never departs. Notice what is completely absent from both of those verses. There is no mention of circumstance. There is no mention of other people. There is no mention of fate or fortune or the mercy of some external power descending to rescue the suffering one. The entire architecture of the teaching is internal. Mind is the forerunner. Mind is the creator. Mind is where the work must happen. This is disorienting for most people because our entire cultural grammar is built around external salvation. In the secular world, we are told that the right relationship will complete us, that the right career will fulfill us, that the right body, the right status, the right combination of achievements will finally make the wobble stop. In the religious world, and here I say this with deep respect for all sincere spiritual seeking, there are traditions that emphasize grace, that emphasize divine intervention, that emphasize the mercy of God or the power of prayer as the primary mechanism of transformation. The Buddha's teaching cuts across all of this. It does not deny the value of prayer or devotion or love, but it insists with absolute clarity that the mind which generates suffering is the same mind that must do the work of liberation. There is no shortcut. There is no bypass. There is no one who can think the right thoughts for you, sit the right meditations for you, face the right fears for you, or let go of the right attachments for you. So why do we wait? Because waiting feels safer than beginning. Because if we are waiting for someone else to save us, we are insulated from the terror of having to save ourselves and potentially failing. Because as long as the rescue is hypothetically on its way, we are not yet required to sit in the full, unguarded, unmedicated weight of our own experience. Waiting is a form of protection. It is the mind's way of saying, I know this hurts, but I am not ready to look at it directly yet. I am not ready to take full ownership of what I am experiencing and what I must do about it. The Buddha understood this protection. He did not tear it away violently. He simply pointed to it, illuminated it, and said, look at what you are doing. Look at the price you are paying for this protection. You are paying with your entire life. You are paying with year after year of the only existence you have, spent standing at a door that opens only from within. The practice begins when you stop waiting, not when you feel ready. Not when conditions are perfect, not when someone else gives you permission or support or the confidence you think you lack. The practice begins when you decide, in whatever small and trembling way you can manage, to take full responsibility for the state of your own mind. This is not a cold, isolated, self-reliant individualism. The Buddha is not telling you to wall yourself off from the world. He is telling you that the relationship you have with your own mind is the ground from which every other relationship in your life grows. If that ground is contaminated with waiting, with blame, with the chronic expectation that someone or something outside you will finally arrive and make everything okay, then everything that grows from it will carry that contamination. Clean the ground. That is the first instruction. Recognize the architecture of waiting. See it for what it is, a postponement of your own becoming. And then, with whatever strength you have available right now, in this moment, turn to face yourself. Because you are, always have been, and always will be the only one who can do what needs to be done. 2. Anatta, the self that cannot be saved. Once you understand that nobody is coming to save you, the next question should stop you cold, because it is not a small question. It is the question that the entire tradition of Buddhism rotates around, the question that the Buddha considered so important that he returned to it again and again across 45 years of teaching, the question that has shattered the certainties of seekers in every culture that has ever encountered it. Who exactly is it that needs saving? This is the teaching of anatta, non-self. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most radical, most challenging, most liberating insights that any human being has ever articulated. We walk through life with a very strong, very convincing, almost completely unexamined assumption operating in the background of every experience. The assumption that there is a me here, a continuous, solid, unified, persistent entity that has been you since you were born, that will be you until you die, that experiences things, that suffers, that wants, that fears, that loves, that is saved or damned or liberated or lost. You feel this me so vividly that questioning its existence seems not just counterintuitive, but slightly insane. Of course, there is a self. You are reading these words right now. Who is reading them if not you? Sit with that question for a moment, not rhetorically. Actually sit with it. The Buddha's investigation of this question was exhaustive and systematic. He looked at the body. Is the body the self? Your body was radically different 7 years ago. Every cell has been replaced, every bone has been rebuilt, every strand of hair has fallen and grown back. The body you inhabit today is not the body you inhabited in your childhood. If your body is yourself, which version of it? And what happens to yourself when your body sleeps, when it is anesthetized, when it is so racked by fever that you cannot form a coherent thought? Is the self diminished when the body is diminished? And if the self depends on the body, if the self requires the body to exist, then can the self truly be called a self, an independent, autonomous, enduring entity at all? He looked at feelings. Is the self your feelings? But feelings are notoriously unstable. You felt one thing this morning and another thing this evening. The grief that consumed you completely last year has softened. The joy you felt at some great triumph has faded. If you are your feelings, you are a different self every few minutes, every few hours, every season. Which of those fleeting feeling states is the real you? He looked at perceptions, at mental formations, at consciousness itself. And in every case, applying the same rigorous analysis, he found the same thing: impermanence, change, flux, process. He found phenomena arising and passing away, conditions causing effects which in turn became conditions for further effects, an endless river of experience with no fixed point that could be pointed to and said, "There, that is the unchanging self." What he found instead was what he called the 5 aggregates form: feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, 5 streams of constantly changing experience that we bundle together and label me, because the bundling itself is such a deeply ingrained habit that we cannot imagine doing otherwise. We are not a thing, the Buddha said. We are a process. We are not a noun. We are a verb. We are something happening, not something that is. Now, feel the implications of this for the question of salvation. If the self is not a fixed, solid, unified entity, if it is a process, a collection of flowing, interdependent, constantly shifting phenomena, then what exactly is suffering? What exactly is liberation? What exactly needs to be saved? The answer is extraordinary and, once understood, permanently changes the way you relate to your own pain. Suffering, in the Buddhist understanding, is not something that happens to a self. Suffering is something that the process of self-making generates. It is the inevitable consequence of grasping at the flowing river of experience and insisting that certain parts of it stay still, insisting that pleasure stay and pain go, that youth stay and aging go, that the people we love stay and never leave, that the things we have achieved stay solidly in place and never slip away. Suffering is what happens when a process that cannot stop moving meets a mind that insists it must. And liberation is not the salvation of a self. Liberation is the cessation of the compulsive, habitual, deeply conditioned process of self-making. It is the moment radical, vertiginous, profoundly peaceful when the mind stops grasping, stops insisting, stops demanding that the river hold still, and simply rests in the movement itself. This state, in the deepest Buddhist understanding, is not emptiness in the nihilistic sense. It is not the annihilation of experience. It is experience without the distortion, without the interference, without the constant static of a self that is perpetually trying to manage, control, acquire, and defend. This is why nobody can save you. Not because they do not love you, not because they do not want to help, but because the thing that needs to end the compulsive construction of a separate self that clings and grasps and fears is a process that only you can interrupt. Nobody else can stop your grasping. Nobody else can loosen your grip. Nobody else can inhabit the space inside your own mind where the work must be done. But here is what this teaching also means, and it is important not to miss it. If the self is not a solid, fixed thing, if it is a process, then the suffering self is not your true nature. It is not who you fundamentally are. It is a pattern of activity, and patterns can change. Habits of mind that took decades to build can be dismantled. The process of self-making can be gradually, carefully, through patient practice, loosened. The grip can relax. The river can be allowed to flow. You do not need to be saved from the outside, because what you are being saved from is a fiction you have been generating from the inside. This is simultaneously the most humbling and the most empowering thing the Buddha ever taught. Humbling because it places the responsibility for your suffering squarely in your own lap. Empowering because it means the cage you are in is one you have built yourself, which also means it is one you are capable of unlocking yourself. The key is already in your hand. It has always been there. You have simply been looking for someone else to use it. 3. The fire of craving, understanding what you are actually letting go of. The Buddha's second noble truth is samudaya, the origin of suffering. And with characteristic precision, with the clarity of someone who had investigated the mechanics of the mind more thoroughly than perhaps anyone in human history, he identified that origin in a single Pali word, tanha, craving, thirst. Not desire in general, not wanting in general, not ambition or hope or preference or the natural human inclination toward pleasure and away from pain. Tanha is something more specific and more pathological than any of those. Tana is the particular quality of wanting that is tinged with desperation, with clinging, with the frantic edge of a mind that believes it cannot be okay unless it gets what it is reaching for. Tanha is not the gentle wish for a glass of water. Tanha is the parched desperation of someone who believes they are dying of thirst, who cannot think, cannot breathe, cannot exist in any meaningful way until the thirst is quenched, and who, even when they drink, finds that the thirst returns and intensifies and demands more. The Buddha identified 3 forms of tanha that between them cover virtually every dimension of human suffering. The first is kama tanha, craving for sensual pleasure. The desire for beautiful sights, for delicious food, for touch, for music, for sex, for all the pleasures that come through the 5 senses. This is the most immediately recognizable form of craving, and it operates in all of us with extraordinary power. We pursue pleasure with tremendous energy, and when we get it, we hold on to it, and when it fades, as it always does, we feel the loss as pain. The pleasure was never the problem. The clinging to it, the demand that it stay, the grief when it goes, that is tanha. The second form is bhava tanha, craving for existence, the deep, often unconscious wish to continue, to persist, to be. This is the craving that makes us cling to our identities, our stories, our sense of who we are. It is the craving that makes the prospect of change feel like death, because in a very real psychological sense, to let go of the story you have been telling about yourself is to let one version of yourself die. Bhava tanha is why people stay in situations that are destroying them, in relationships that have long since stopped nourishing them, in careers that are hollowing them out, in belief systems that no longer serve them, because the known pain of continuity feels safer than the unknown freedom of change. The third form is vibhava tanha, craving for non-existence, the wish to not be, to not feel, to not experience. This is the craving that drives avoidance, numbing, dissociation, the compulsive reaching for anything that will dull the sharpness of what is being felt. It is the craving behind addiction, behind distraction, behind the hours lost to screens and noise and busyness that serve no purpose except to keep us from having to sit still with ourselves. Vibhava tanha is at work every time you reach for your phone instead of your breath, every time you pour another drink to take the edge off a feeling you have not named, every time you fill every available moment with sound, because the silence has started to say things you do not want to hear. Now look at the relationship between tanha and the waiting we discussed in the first lesson. Waiting, the outsourcing of liberation, the standing at the door expecting a knock, is itself a form of tanha. It is craving with a particular shape, the desperate wish that relief will arrive from outside, that the thirst will be quenched by something other than the work of letting go. The person who is waiting for someone to save them is a person in the grip of a very specific and very painful craving, the craving for a version of their life in which they do not have to do the work themselves. And here is the thing about tanha that makes it so insidious, so relentlessly self-perpetuating, so genuinely worthy of the Buddha's most urgent attention. It does not get satisfied. This is not pessimism. This is something the Buddha observed empirically, repeatedly, across an enormous range of human experience, and that anyone who has lived long enough and paid attention carefully enough will confirm. Craving is not the kind of thing that can be fed into stillness. Every time you give tanha what it wants, it grows. Its appetite expands with its satisfaction. The person who craves wealth finds that more wealth only intensifies the craving for more wealth. The person who craves validation finds that each portion of approval only makes the hunger for more approval more acute. The person who craves a savior finds that each time someone rescues them, their capacity to rescue themselves diminishes further, and their dependence on rescue deepens. This is the fire of the title. The Buddha's fire sermon, delivered shortly after his enlightenment to a group of fire-worshipping ascetics, is one of the most electrifying speeches in all of ancient literature. Everything is burning, he said. And with what is it burning? It is burning with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion. The fire he described is tanha craving and its two companions, dosa, the fire of hatred and aversion, the desperate wish to push away what we do not want, and moha, the fire of delusion, the fundamental confusion about the nature of reality that makes all of this suffering seem not just inevitable, but somehow right, somehow the proper condition of human existence. The teaching of the fire is not a teaching about suffering as punishment. It is a teaching about suffering as a diagnostic. The burning tells you something. It points to where the craving is, where the clinging is, where the mind is insisting that the river holds still. Every moment of genuine distress in your life, not physical pain, not the natural grief of loss, but the chronic, self-reinforcing, seemingly inescapable suffering that follows you across years and circumstances and relationships, that suffering is a finger pointing at tanha. It is the mind's way of telling you, here is where I am grasping. Here is where I am demanding that something be other than it is. So what do you let go of? Not the people you love, not your ambitions or your preferences or your passions, not your identity or your values or your sense of purpose. What you let go of is the demand. The demand that things stay when they are leaving, the demand that people be different from what they are, the demand that life conform to the story you have decided it must tell. The demand that you be spared the full, unguarded, unmedicated experience of being a human being in a world that does not operate according to your specifications. Letting go is not passive. It is not resignation. It is not the collapse of a defeated person. It is the active, disciplined, profoundly courageous decision to meet reality on its own terms, to allow what is arising to arise, to allow what is passing to pass, to engage fully and wholeheartedly with life, while releasing the compulsive need to control its outcomes. It is, in the words of one of the most beautiful phrases in all of Buddhism, participating without grasping. And you cannot let go until you understand what you are holding. The fire of tanha burns so continuously, so familiarly, that most people cannot even feel it as burning. They simply experience it as their normal state, as vague dissatisfaction, as chronic anxiety, as the restlessness that makes it hard to stay present in any moment for very long. Part of the practice is learning to feel the fire, learning to recognize the particular flavor of craving mind, the particular tension of a mind that is gripping something it cannot hold, insisting on something it cannot have, waiting for something that will not come. When you can feel it, you can work with it. When you can see the fire, you can begin the long, patient, often humbling work of learning not to feed it. 4. Dukkha as teacher. What your suffering is actually trying to show you. There is a moment in serious Buddhist practice. It comes at different times for different people, but almost everyone who practices deeply encounters it when something shifts in your relationship to your own pain. Not the pain itself, not the circumstances that generated it, but your relationship to it. The thing that was chasing you becomes, somehow, something you are willing to face. The thing that was tearing at you becomes, somehow, something you are willing to look at directly. And in that shift, something extraordinary begins to happen. The pain does not disappear, but it begins to teach. The third noble truth, Nirodha, the cessation of suffering, contains within it an understanding of suffering that is completely alien to the way most of us have been taught to think about our pain. In the dominant cultural understanding, suffering is the enemy. It is the thing to be eliminated, escaped, medicated, distracted from, argued with, and above all, blamed on something or someone outside ourselves. Suffering is the problem, and the solution is its removal. This is why we wait for saviors, because we believe that if the right savior arrives, they will carry the suffering away. The Buddhist understanding is different in a way that initially sounds cruel, but is, upon reflection, among the most compassionate teachings ever given. Suffering, in the Dharma, is not the enemy. Suffering is the curriculum. It is the most efficient, most precise, most impossibly well-designed teacher that your life will ever offer you, because it is capable of pointing with absolute accuracy to exactly what needs to be seen, understood, and released. Every moment of pain is a message. The message is always the same at its core, but it manifests differently in each person, in each circumstance, and the skill, the practice, is learning to read it. Consider the suffering of grief. When someone you love dies, or leaves, or changes beyond recognition, the grief that follows is real and deep and demands to be honored. Buddhism does not ask you to bypass grief. It does not ask you to transcend loss before you have fully felt it. The Pali Canon records moments of genuine sorrow in the Buddha's own life and in the lives of his closest disciples. Grief is a natural and healthy response to impermanence when it crashes into a life in a way that cannot be ignored. But at the edge of grief, there is something else, a harder, more constricting layer of suffering that is not about the loss itself, but about the refusal to accept the loss. The layer that says, "This should not have happened. This was not supposed to happen. This must somehow be undone or denied or kept at bay through sheer force of will." That layer that added suffering on top of the natural suffering of loss, that is where the teaching lives. What is it teaching? That impermanence is real, that the nature of all conditioned things is to arise and pass away. That the love you felt was beautiful and genuine and worth every moment, and that the ending of the form it took does not negate it. That you are more than what you have lost, more than the relationship, more than the role, more than the version of yourself that existed in the presence of what is now gone. The grief says, "I loved." The added suffering says, "I cannot survive this." And the practice is slowly, painfully, with tremendous gentleness toward yourself, learning the difference. Consider the suffering of shame. When you have failed publicly, privately, in ways that cut deep into your sense of self, the suffering that follows often has layers. There is the natural discomfort of recognizing a mistake, the genuine remorse that motivates repair and growth. That layer is healthy. That layer is wisdom moving. But beneath it, or around it, there is often a darker and more totalizing layer, the belief that the failure proves something fundamental and irredeemable about you, that you are, at your core, broken, unworthy, beyond rescue. This is the layer that makes people stop trying, stop reaching, collapse in on themselves. And it is this layer, not the recognition of the mistake, but the catastrophizing of the mistake into a verdict on the self, that the Buddha would gently, persistently direct you to examine. What is it teaching? Look again at the teaching of anatta. The self that failed is not a fixed thing. It is a process. It made a choice under conditions that produced that choice. Those conditions have passed. New conditions exist. The process continues. You are not the failure. You performed a failure, which is completely different, and the performance was shaped by ignorance and tanha and moha, the same forces that shape every unskillful act that every human being has ever committed. The suffering of shame, examined carefully, points directly to the teaching of anatta and opens the door to genuine self-compassion, not the soft, saccharine self-compassion of flattery, but the deep, clear self-compassion of understanding. I am a process that is capable of change, and this moment of suffering is showing me exactly where the change needs to happen. Consider the suffering of fear. Fear is perhaps the most universal of all human experiences and the most consistently mishandled. In the waiting mind, the mind that is standing at the door expecting salvation, fear is the primary reason for waiting. We do not begin because we are afraid we will fail. We do not let go because we are afraid of what we will feel without the thing we are holding. We do not face ourselves because we are afraid of what we will find. Fear is the engine of avoidance, and avoidance is the engine of all the ways we have found to not be present in our own lives. But what is fear actually? In the Buddhist understanding, fear is aversion, the fire of dosa, applied to something that has not yet happened. Fear is the mind's projection of future pain, and its insistence on treating that projection as if it were real. The thing you fear is, by definition, not present. The sensation of fear is present, and that sensation, examined honestly, is the teaching. Because what you will find, if you turn to face the fear rather than run from it, if you bring to it the mindful, open, non-reactive awareness that is the heart of Buddhist practice, is that the fear itself is a conditioned process. It is not you, it is not your destiny. It is a pattern of activity in the mind-body system that is producing an experience, and that experience, like all experiences, arises and passes away. You cannot make fear disappear by confronting it once. But you can begin to see through it. You can begin to recognize it as a weather pattern rather than a fundamental truth. The Zen teacher, Shunryu Suzuki, is said to have told his students, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This is the spirit in which the Buddhist teaching on suffering should be understood. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally flawed. The suffering you experience is not evidence of your inadequacy, it is evidence of your humanity. But the humanity can be worked with, the patterns can be seen, the fire can be understood. And in that understanding, in that clear, compassionate, honest seeing, lies the possibility of a different relationship to your own experience, one in which pain is no longer the enemy, and in which the knowledge that nobody is coming to save you is not a reason for despair, but a doorway to a completely different kind of freedom. The Buddha called the first noble truth the recognition of dukkha not a curse, but a gift. Because once you have really seen the suffering, really felt it without flinching, really understood its architecture and its causes, you have already taken the most important step toward its end. The door opens from inside, and the key is made of nothing more and nothing less than honest, unflinching, compassionate attention to what is. 5. The middle way, the path that leads through, not around. There is a story in the early Buddhist scriptures that is often told, but not often understood in its full depth. Before Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, he spent years as an ascetic, a spiritual seeker, who had committed to the path of extreme self-denial. He ate almost nothing. He exposed himself to extreme cold and heat. He held his breath until he nearly lost consciousness. He pushed his body to the absolute edge of survival in the belief that through complete annihilation of physical desire, through the total defeat of the body's needs and wants, he would achieve the liberation he was seeking. This was not a casual experiment. He gave years of his life to this practice, and he became, by all accounts, extraordinarily skilled at it. He was admired. He had followers. By every available measure, he was succeeding at the path he had chosen, and yet liberation did not come. The more extreme his austerities became, the more his suffering, the mental and spiritual suffering beneath the physical suffering, remained unchanged. He was punishing the body, but the mind that needed to be seen and freed was untouched. The story of his abandonment of extreme asceticism is also the story of his greatest insight before the Enlightenment itself. Sitting near a river, on the edge of death from starvation, he heard a musician on a passing boat tuning his instrument. He heard the man say to his student, "If you tighten the string too much, it will break. If you leave it too loose, it will not play." And something in Siddhartha recognized in those words a truth that had been eluding him for years. He accepted a bowl of rice milk from a village girl named Sujata. He ate, he recovered. His ascetic followers, scandalized by what they saw as weakness, abandoned him. And he sat down alone under the Bodhi tree and began the work that would change human history. The middle way, the path that the Buddha articulated from the very first discourse he gave after his enlightenment, is not a compromise. It is not a little bit of pleasure and a little bit of austerity, nicely balanced. That is the popular misconception. The middle way is something far more subtle and far more demanding. It is the path that runs directly through the center of experience, neither grasping at pleasure nor violently repelling pain. It is the path of full engagement without addiction, full presence without clinging, full effort without compulsion. For the person who has understood that nobody is coming to save them, who has accepted the full weight of that understanding and decided to do the work, the middle way is the map. Because there are two ways to respond to the realization that you alone are responsible for your liberation, and only one of them actually works. The first response is what we might call spiritual violence. This is the person who hears, "Nobody is coming to save you," and translates it as, "You must be harder, you must push more. You must eliminate all weakness, all need, all vulnerability. You must discipline yourself into freedom through sheer relentless will. You must meditate for hours, even when your mind is bleeding with exhaustion. You must cut off every relationship that is less than perfectly pure. You must live on water and sunlight and the certainty of your own righteousness." This response is the inner ascetic Siddhartha before the river, before the music, before the bowl of rice milk. And it does not work, for exactly the same reason the external grasping does not work. It is still driven by tanha. It is still the mind trying to force a particular outcome, still grasping at liberation as something that can be seized by enough effort. It is craving with a spiritual mask on. The second response is what we might call spiritual passivity. This is the person who hears, "Nobody is coming to save you," and collapses into despair or into a numb acquiescence to suffering. If there is no savior, what is the point of trying? If all is impermanent, why care about anything? If the self is not real, then surely my suffering is not real either, so there is no need to work with it. This is the misuse of Buddhist philosophy as a reason not to engage, using the teaching of impermanence as an excuse for nihilism, the teaching of non-self as an excuse for irresponsibility, the teaching of non-attachment as an excuse for disengagement from life. This is the string too loose. It will not play. The middle way cuts between both of these. It says, effort is required, but effort driven by clear understanding rather than craving. Discipline is required, but discipline born of genuine care for your own well-being rather than self-punishment. Engagement is required, but engagement that is free from the desperate need for a particular outcome. Practice is required, but practice that is gentle enough to be sustainable, honest enough to be effective, and patient enough to allow transformation to unfold at its own pace rather than the pace your anxiety demands. In practical terms, what does this mean? It means that the path of letting go, which is the path this video is fundamentally about, does not happen through violent repression of what you feel. It does not happen by telling yourself that your grief is illegitimate, that your fear is weakness, that your craving is shameful and must be stamped out by force. Repression is not liberation. Suppression is not the cessation of suffering. You cannot grit your teeth hard enough to become free. It means, equally, that the path does not happen through endless indulgence of every feeling that arises, through treating every thought as sacred and every impulse as wisdom. The undisciplined mind that follows every craving is as far from liberation as the violent mind that suppresses every feeling. They are two forms of the same confusion. What the middle way asks for is something more refined and more demanding than either extreme. The willingness to be present with your experience, all of it, including the parts that are ugly and shameful and frightening, without either grasping at it or pushing it away. To sit in the fire without feeding it, to feel the grief without building a monument to it, to recognize the craving without obeying it, to notice the fear without running from it or pretending it does not exist. This is called equanimity upekkha in Pali, and it is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the divine abidings, the heart qualities that the Buddhist tradition considers the fullest expression of liberated mind. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the quality of mind that can be in the presence of intense experience, joy, grief, pleasure, pain without being destabilized by it. It is the stillness at the center of the wheel, not the absence of the wheels turning. And it is cultivated, the Buddha taught, not by avoiding difficult experiences, but by learning to meet them differently, by showing up again and again to the present moment through formal meditation practice, through the daily practice of mindfulness, through the cultivation of the Brahma Viharas, through the patient, deliberate, gradual training of a mind that has spent decades rehearsing reactivity, and by practicing, in each encounter with difficulty, the simple, radical, endlessly challenging gesture of not adding to what is already there. The string is already vibrating. You do not need to tighten it until it breaks or loosen it until it goes silent. You need to learn to hear the note it is already playing, and then, from that hearing, play the music that only you are capable of making. 6. Metta and the paradox of letting go together. We have spent considerable time understanding what it means to do this work alone, to accept the full responsibility of your own liberation, to stop waiting for a savior, to turn inward and begin the work that only you can do. And if the teaching stopped there, it would be complete, it would be true. But it would also be only half of the full picture that the Buddha painted, and the half that is missing is, in many ways, the most beautiful and most humanizing part of the entire teaching. Because the Buddha did not teach liberation as a solitary achievement. He did not teach it as the conquest of the self by the self, the isolated individual sealed in a cave, perfecting their practice in magnificent disconnection from the world. He taught it as something that happens both within and through relationship, not through dependence on others to do your work, but through the cultivation of a quality of presence with others that itself becomes a vehicle of awakening. This quality has a name, metta, loving kindness, and it is not a sentiment. It is not a feeling that you manufacture through affirmations or effort of will. It is a radical, practice-based, deeply transformative orientation toward all living beings. including and especially yourself, that the Buddhist tradition regards as one of the most powerful forces for liberation available to a human being. The metta bhavana, the cultivation of loving kindness, is one of the oldest meditation practices in Buddhism. It appears in the Metta Sutta, one of the most luminous texts in the Pali Canon, which the Buddha taught to a group of monks who had been frightened by spirits in the forest. The practice is simple in structure and inexhaustible in depth. You begin by offering loving kindness to yourself. May I be happy, may I be well, may I be safe, may I be at peace. Then you extend it outward in widening circles to a loved one, to a neutral person, to a difficult person, and finally to all beings everywhere, without distinction. The reason the Buddha began with the self is important and often overlooked. In much of the discourse around self-sacrifice and selflessness, there is an implicit message that caring for yourself is somehow spiritually inferior to caring for others, that the truly evolved person has no self-interest, no self-compassion, no time for their own healing because they are too busy healing the world. This is a misunderstanding and a dangerous one. The Buddha was absolutely clear. You cannot genuinely offer loving kindness to others from a place of self-contempt. You cannot be a vessel of compassion if you are full of self-hatred. The metta practice begins with yourself, not as an act of narcissism, but as an act of basic sanity, because without genuine friendliness toward your own experience, without the willingness to wish yourself well and mean it, everything you extend outward will be contaminated by the unresolved pain you are projecting. This is where the paradox of letting go together lives. The work of liberation, the full, serious, unflinching work of seeing the self clearly, understanding the nature of suffering, releasing the grip of tanha. This work is done alone in the sense that nobody can do it for you, but it is not done in isolation. The cultivation of metta, of genuine, open-hearted, non-transactional care for the well-being of others, is itself one of the most powerful practices for softening the very tendencies that perpetuate suffering. Why? Because suffering is, at its root, a contracted state. It is the mind pulled tight around a fixed center, the self that must be protected, defended, validated, preserved. Metta is the practice that begins to loosen that contraction. When you genuinely wish another being to be happy, not as a performance, not to earn their approval, not as a transaction, but as a simple, open-hearted, unmotivated expression of care, something happens in the mind. The self-center softens. The boundary between me and other becomes more permeable. The chronic, exhausting preoccupation with the welfare of this particular cluster of aggregates we call ourselves begins, gradually, to relax. And in that relaxation, the teaching of anatta, of non-self, becomes not just an intellectual concept, but a lived experience. You begin to feel, not just understand, that the suffering you have been carrying so closely is not as fixed and solid and irremovable as it has always seemed. You begin to sense the possibility of a different orientation to your own experience, one that is not driven by the desperate self-protectiveness that has characterized so much of your inner life. The great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, whose teaching on interbeing has introduced millions of people to the heart of Buddhist practice, described this in terms of the word interbeing, the reality that nothing exists independently, that every phenomenon arises in dependence on every other phenomenon, that you and I and the tree outside and the cloud above the tree, and the rain that fed the cloud and the ocean that produced the rain, are all expressions of the same extraordinary, incomprehensible web of interdependence. To see yourself clearly through the teaching of anatta is to see yourself not as an isolated atom of consciousness trying to survive in a hostile universe, but as an expression of the whole, a wave in the ocean, temporary in form, but continuous in substance with everything that has ever been or will ever be. From that understanding, the practice of metta is not a discipline, it is a recognition. It is the mind returning to its own deepest nature, which is, the Buddhist teaching insists, not contracted and isolated and afraid, but open and connected and, in its essence, characterized by the warmth and clarity that the tradition calls Buddha nature. You are doing the work alone, and you are doing it together. Both of these are true simultaneously. The alone is the honesty, the refusal to outsource what cannot be outsourced. The together is the context, the recognition that the mind that needs to be freed is not separate from the world it inhabits, and that the cultivation of genuine compassion for others is not a distraction from your own liberation, but one of its most reliable vehicles. Let the metta be real. Let it start with yourself. Let it move outward toward the people you love, toward the people who have hurt you, toward the strangers whose suffering you will never personally witness. Let it be not a performance, but a practice daily, imperfect, gradually deepening. And let it show you what the Buddha promised it would show you, that the self you have been trying to save is not as separate, not as fragile, and not as in need of salvation as you have always believed. 7. Nirodha and the freedom that was always here, the practice of arriving. We come now to the teaching that everything else in this video has been building toward. The teaching that is, in a very real sense, the entire point not just of this video, but of 25 centuries of Buddhist practice, of the fire of the Buddha's own awakening, of every monastery and retreat center and meditation cushion and moment of honest, earnest, desperate human seeking for something beyond the grinding cycle of suffering. The third noble truth, nirodha, cessation, the end of suffering, not the suppression of it, not the transcendence of it by someone strong enough to rise above it, not the relief from it that comes when external circumstances finally align in your favor. The actual, real, possible, within your reach cessation of the suffering that has been following you through your life, through your relationships, through your losses and your triumphs and your ordinary days, since before you can remember. The Buddha did not say this as a promise about some distant future state, accessible only to monks who had been practicing for decades, or to enlightened masters in high Himalayan caves. He said it as a statement of present-tense possibility. Nirodha is available. The freedom is here. Not later, not after you have fixed yourself, not after you have found the perfect teacher or read the perfect book or had the perfect meditation experience. Here, in this body, in this mind, in this very life with all its imperfections and complications and history of suffering. The fourth noble truth, Magga, the path outlines the specific practices through which this freedom is cultivated and deepened. The noble eightfold path, the comprehensive training in right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. But the eighth and deepest truth, the one that the path leads to, and that the path is in some sense an expression of, is simpler than any specific practice. It is the recognition of something that has always been present, hiding in plain sight, beneath and behind and within every moment of experience. It is this. Beneath the noise of the wanting and the fearing, beneath the endless commentary of the calculating mind, beneath the craving and the aversion and the confusion that characterize so much of ordinary human consciousness, there is something else, something quiet, something that is not suffering and has never suffered. Something that watches the arising and passing of all phenomena, including the phenomena of suffering itself, with a quality of awareness that is simultaneously utterly open and utterly still. A consciousness that is aware without being caught. A presence that is fully here without being swept away. This is what the Buddhist tradition means by Buddha nature. This is what the Zen tradition points to in its koans and its sudden, vertiginous moments of satori. This is what the Theravada tradition cultivates through the patient, rigorous practice of vipassana insight meditation, through which the meditator learns to see, with increasing clarity and steadiness, the true nature of each arising phenomenon, impermanent, unsatisfying, not self. And in that seeing, not the intellectual understanding of it, but the direct, experiential, moment-to-moment perception of it, the grasping begins, slowly, to relax. The freedom is not a state you achieve, it is a recognition you return to, again and again. In formal meditation and in the middle of an argument and in the moment of grief and in the ordinary, unremarkable Wednesday afternoon when nothing particular is happening and you are simply washing a bowl. The practice is arriving in the present moment, which is the only moment that has ever existed, the only moment in which liberation is possible, the only moment in which the fire of tanha is actually burning, and therefore the only moment in which it can actually be understood. The monk Ajahn Chah, one of the most beloved Thai forest masters of the 20th century, used to hold up a glass and say to his students, "To me this glass is already broken. I enjoy it, I drink out of it, it holds my water admirably. But when I put this glass on the shelf and the wind knocks it over, or my elbow brushes it off the table and it falls to the ground and shatters, I say, of course. But this does not stop me from enjoying the glass. This is not pessimism, this is freedom. The glass is fully enjoyed, fully present, fully appreciated, and the suffering of its breaking is already absorbed, already understood, already held lightly within the larger understanding of impermanence. The clinging is not there. The demand that the glass stay is not there, and so the joy is real, and the loss is bearable, and neither distorts the other. This is what the practice of letting go actually looks like in a life. Not a cold, detached, glassy-eyed floating above experience, not the performance of peace, not the spiritual bypassing of genuine emotion. A fully engaged, fully feeling, fully present life, lived in the knowledge that everything arising will pass, that the self doing the living is more porous and more spacious than it has ever seemed, and that the suffering that has been so central to your story is not, and has never been, the whole story. Nobody is coming to save you, and that is the most liberating sentence you will ever hear, because it also means you do not need to be saved. You need to see. You need to pay attention. You need to sit with yourself in the places that have been too painful to visit, and look without flinching, and understand without judgment, and slowly, gradually, one breath at a time, release the grip that has been generating your suffering. You have right now, in this moment, everything that is required, not everything you want, not the absence of pain or difficulty or loss, not the perfectly arranged circumstances, not the savior at the door. What you have is this: awareness, the capacity to be present, the capacity to see clearly, the capacity to choose, in this moment, whether to feed the fire or to simply see it for what it is, a process, impermanent, conditioned, and not you. The Zen tradition has a teaching that is deceptively simple and endlessly deep. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The life does not change. The bowl still needs washing. The floor still needs sweeping. The hard conversations still need to be had. The losses still happen. The body still ages. The world is still the world, with all of its beauty and brutality and ordinary, irreducible humanness. What changes is the one who is doing the chopping, the carrying, the washing. What changes is the quality of presence that meets each moment. What changes is the relationship between the mind and its experience, from grasping to receiving, from demanding to allowing, from contracting around a defended self to opening in recognition of something larger, something quieter, something that was never in danger and never needed saving. You are already there. You have been there the whole time. The door is not locked. It was never locked. It only appeared locked because you were looking for someone else to open it. The practice is simple, not easy, but simple. Sit down, be still, breathe, notice what arises. Notice the pulling toward what you want and the pushing away from what you fear. Notice the stories the mind tells about who you are and what you deserve and what you have lost and what you are waiting for. Notice all of it with the steady, kind, unhurried attention of someone who has finally decided to come home. And then, in whatever measure you can manage today, not perfectly, not permanently, but genuinely let it go. Not because the things you are holding do not matter, not because the grief was not real, not because the love was not worth it, not because the loss was not a loss, but because the holding is not serving you. Because the grip is hurting the very hands it occupies. Because there is a freedom available to you right now that does not require anyone's permission, does not require any particular circumstance, does not require anything that you do not already possess, and that you have been postponing with the patient faith that someone else would eventually arrive and give it to you. Nobody is coming, the path is yours, the lamp is in your hand, and the darkness, which has seemed so absolute and so permanent, is not as deep as you have feared. Take one step, then another, and another. This is the beginning, this has always been the beginning, and you are already in it. 25 centuries ago, a man sat down under a tree and refused to get up until he understood the nature of suffering. Not his suffering, not the suffering of his particular life and his particular losses. The nature of suffering itself, what it is, where it comes from, whether it can end, and if so, how. He sat through the night. He faced everything that arose, every fear, every craving, every seduction, every threat, every invitation to defer the seeing until some better, safer, more convenient moment. And in the hour before dawn, something broke open that has been offering light to seekers ever since. The Buddha did not receive that light from a deity. He did not inherit it. He did not luck into it. He did not wait for it to come to him. He sat down, he paid attention, he stayed, and he saw. And what he saw, he spent the rest of his life pointing others toward, not as a doctrine to be believed, but as a territory to be explored, not as a faith to be accepted, but as a practice to be engaged. You have been given the same capacity he had, the same awareness, the same potential for seeing clearly, the same possibility of freedom. You have been given a life, which is the only classroom you need. You have been given suffering, which is the most efficient teacher available. You have been given this moment, which is the only one in which the work can happen. Nobody is coming, and you are ready. You have been ready. Step through the door.